Welcome to Thrones Rewritten, where we reimagine the epic tales of Westeros with bold new twists. In today's video, we dive into a gripping what-if scenario. What if Robb Stark, the young wolf, survived the Red Wedding? Join us as we explore a reimagined North, where betrayal fuels vengeance and the Stark legacy fights to rise from the ashes. Expect intense battles, cunning strategies, and the unyielding spirit of House Stark. If you love Game of Thrones and crave fresh stories, hit that subscribe button, like the video, and let's march with the wolves of the North. The rain fell in relentless sheets, drumming against the canvas of the Stark encampment. The twins loomed in the distance, their squat towers shrouded in mist, a grim reminder of the pact that had brought Robb Stark, king in the North, to this forsaken place. The Freys had demanded a wedding to seal their alliance, and Robb, ever the dutiful son, had agreed to wed one of Lord Walder's daughters to mend the slight of breaking his earlier betrothal. But the air was thick with unease, and the young wolf's instincts, honed by years of war, prickled with warning. Inside the great hall of the twins, the feast was a raucous affair. The Freys, their kin, and their bannermen filled the tables, their laughter sharp and hollow. Robb sat at the high table, his mother Cailin at his side, her face a mask of guarded vigilance. Across from them, Lord Walder Frey grinned, his rheumy eyes glinting with malice. The wine flowed freely, and the music, discordant and grating, filled the air. Robb's men, scattered among the Freys, drank and jested, but their hands never strayed far from their swords. Grey Wind, Robb's direwolf, had been chained outside, his howls muffled by the storm. Robb had protested, but Walder had insisted, claiming the beast frightened his daughters. The absence of his companion gnawed at Robb, a void that mirrored the growing dread in his gut. He leaned toward his mother, his voice low. "Something's wrong. The Freys are too eager, too smug." Catelyn's hand tightened on his arm. "Stay sharp, Robb. We're surrounded. If they mean to betray us, we must be ready." The moment came as the musicians struck up the Rains of Castamere, the Lannister anthem ringing like a death knell. Robb's eyes darted to the gallery where crossbowmen emerged, their bolts trained on the hall. The Freys at the tables drew blades, and chaos erupted. Robb's men shouted, reaching for weapons, but the trap was sprung. Steel met flesh, and blood sprayed across the rushes. Cailin seized a knife and hauled Walder's wife Joyeuse from her seat, pressing the blade to her throat. "Stop this, Walder!" she screamed, "or she dies!" But Robb was already moving. He vaulted over the table, his sword drawn, as a crossbow bolt grazed his shoulder. Pain flared, but he ignored it, cutting down a Frey man-at-arms who lunged at him. His bannermen rallied, forming a shield around their king, but the odds were grim. The hall was a slaughterhouse, and Robb's heart pounded with the realization that they were outnumbered, betrayed, and trapped. Yet fate, or perhaps the old gods, had other plans. Amid the carnage, a figure burst through the hall's side door. A boy, no older than 14, clad in stark colors. It was Rickon Stark, thought to be dead or lost, his wild eyes blazing with desperation. Behind him came Osha, the wildling woman, wielding a spear, and a small band of loyal Stark retainers. They had slipped into the twins under cover of the storm, guided by Rickon's uncanny instincts and Grey Wind's distant howls. "Robb!" Rickon shouted, hurling a dagger that caught a Frey archer in the throat. "The wolf! Free the wolf!" Robb didn't hesitate. He fought his way toward the door, his men carving a bloody path. Cailin dragged Joyeuse with her, using the woman as a shield against the crossbowmen landing. Outside, the storm raged, and Robb found Grey Wind straining against his chains, his eyes glowing like embers. With a single stroke, Robb shattered the lock, and the direwolf leaped free, a whirlwind of teeth and fury. Grey Wind tore into the Frey guards, giving Robb's men a chance to regroup. "Get to the river!" Robb roared, his voice cutting through the chaos. The Stark forces, battered but unbroken, fought their way to the Green Fork, where a handful of loyal boats waited, hidden by Osha's cunning. Cailin shoved Joyeuse into the hands of a Stark man-at-arms, her face fierce. "Keep her alive! She's our leverage!" As they piled into the boats, arrows rained down from the twins' walls, but the storm cloaked their escape. Grey Wind swam alongside, his snarls a beacon in the dark. Robb's heart thundered, not with fear, but with a burning resolve. The Freys had tried to end his line, to snuff out the North's hope. They had failed. The survivors washed ashore miles downstream, a ragged band of fewer than 200. Robb, Cailin, Rickon, Osha, and a handful of loyal lords. Greyjanumber, Mage Mormont, and Jason Mallister among them, took shelter in a dense thicket, the rain masking their tracks. Robb's shoulder wound throbbed, but he refused Maester Vyman's attentions, his mind racing. The Red Wedding, as it would come to be called, had been a Lannister plot, orchestrated by Tywin Lannister and executed by Walder Frey and Rose Bolton. The North was leaderless, its armies scattered, and Robb's wife, Jane Westerling, was still at Reverun, vulnerable to betrayal. "We've lost everything," Cailin said, her voice hollow as she stared into the fire. "Your bannermen, your allies, your reputation. The North will think you dead." "Not everything," Robb said, his jaw tight. He knelt beside Rickon, gripping his brother's shoulders. "You're alive. The Stark blood endures." Rickon's eyes, so like their father's, burned with a mix of fear and defiance. Robb turned to his men, their faces grim but unbroken. "The Freys and Lannisters think they've won. They think the North will bend. They're wrong." Greatchen Umber, bloodied but unbowed, slammed his fist into his palm. "Let's gut the Freys and hang their corpses from the twins." "Not yet," Robb said, his voice steady. "We're too few, and the North is in chaos. We need to regroup, find our allies, and strike when they least expect it. The Lannisters will pay, and the Freys will choke on their treachery. But first we survive." Osha, crouched beside Rick, and nodded. "The boy's got a gift. He knew you were in danger, led us straight to you. The old gods are watching, Stark." Robb met her gaze, feeling the weight of her words. The old gods had spared him, but for what purpose? To avenge his father? To save his people? Or simply to endure, a lone wolf in a world of lions and snakes? Over the next weeks, Robb's band moved north, avoiding Frey and Bolton patrols. They traveled by night, guided by Osha's knowledge of the wild and Rickon's uncanny instincts. The boy spoke little, but his presence was a spark of hope, a reminder of the family Robb had thought lost. Cailin, though haunted by the slaughter at the twins, proved invaluable, her sharp mind plotting their next moves. She urged Robb to seek out the Crannamen, the elusive folk of the Neck, who had sworn fealty to House Stark. At Greywater Watch, the moving castle of Howland Reed, Robb found a wary but loyal ally. Howland, a small man with eyes like green pools, greeted Robb with a bow. "The North remembers, your grace. We thought you dead, but the gods have spared you. My men are yours." Howland's Crannamen, masters of stealth and guerrilla warfare, became Robb's eyes and ears. They brought word of the North State. Rose Bolton had declared himself Warden of the North, ruling from the Dreadfort with an iron hand. The Freys held the twins and harassed Stark loyalists, while the Ironborn still clung to Moat Cailin and parts of the coast. Worst of all, Winterfell lay in ruins, burned by Theon Greyjoy's treachery, and Bran and Arya were presumed dead. The news struck Robb like a physical blow. He stood alone in the marshes, staring at the stars, his hand buried in Grey Wind's fur. "I failed them," he whispered. "My brothers, my sisters, my home." Grey Wind whined, pressing against him, and Robb drew strength from the beast's warmth. "No," he said, his voice hardening. "I'm not done. The North is not done." Howland's scouts also brought word of Jane Westerling. She was still at Riverrun, under the protection of Robb's uncle, Edmure Tully, but the castle was besieged by Lannister forces. Robb's heart ached for his wife, but he knew he couldn't reach her. Not yet. Instead, he sent a Crannogman with a coded message, urging Edmure to hold fast and assuring Jane of his survival. Robb's first act of defiance came in the form of a raid. The Crannamen identified a Frey supply caravan moving through the Neck, laden with grain and weapons for Bolton's forces. Robb, with Greitchen, Midge, and a small band of fighters, struck under cover of fog. The attack was swift and brutal. Grey Wind led the charge, his jaws snapping through armor while Robb's sword sang with vengeance. The Freys fell, their screams swallowed by the marsh, and the supplies were seized for the Stark cause. The raid was a small victory, but it sent a message. The young wolf lived. Whispers spread through the North, carried by travelers and small folk. Robb Stark had survived the Red Wedding. The king in the North was not dead. Bolstered by the raid's success, Robb began to rebuild his forces. He sent Mage Mormont to Bear Island to rally her kin, and Jason Mallister to Seaguard to muster the Riverlords still loyal to House Tully. Howland's men spread disinformation, planting rumors of Robb's death to lull the Boltons and Freys into complacency. Meanwhile, Robb trained his small band in the Crannamen's ways, hit-and-run tactics, ambushes, and survival in the wild. Rickon proved an unexpected asset. The boy, wild and untamed, took to the marshes like a fish to water. He scouted with Osha, his bond with the land almost supernatural. One night, as they sat around a fire, Rickon spoke of a dream. A great weirwood tree, its branches heavy with snow, whispering of a gathering storm. "The North needs you, Robb," he said, his voice eerily calm. "The wolves will rise again." Cailin, ever practical, urged caution. "Dreams are not plans, Robb. We need allies, not omens. The Vale, the Wildlings, even the Ironborn, anyone who hates the Lannisters as much as we do." Robb nodded, his mind already turning. The Vale, ruled by his aunt Lisa Orem, was a possibility, though Lysa's cowardice was legendary. The Wildlings, led by Mance Rayder, were a wild card, but their hatred of the Lannisters might make them allies. And the Ironborn, fractured by Balon Greyjoy's death, could be swayed if Robb could exploit their divisions. As winter tightened its grip, Robb's band grew, bolstered by Stark loyalists who had escaped the Red Wedding or fled Bolton's tyranny. They called themselves the Wolves of the North, a guerrilla force that struck at Frey and Bolton outposts, vanishing into the wild before retaliation could come. Robb's legend grew, a beacon for the North's downtrodden. Songs began to circulate, tales of the young wolf who defied death itself. But Robb knew the truth. He was no legend, only a man, wounded and hunted, carrying the weight of a broken kingdom. Each night he dreamed of the twins, of the blood and the betrayal, and woke with Grey Wind's eyes on him, steady and unyielding. The direwolf was his strength, his reminder of the North's wild heart. One evening, as the wolves of the North gathered in a hidden camp, a Cranoan arrived with urgent news. A Bolton force, led by Ramsay Snow, Rose's bastard, was marching toward the Neck, intent on rooting out the Stark remnants. Ramsay, known for his cruelty, had flayed men alive to draw Robb out. Robb stood, his hand on his sword, his eyes alight with a cold fire. "Let him come," he said. "The North remembers, and the North will fight." The stage was set for a new battle, not in the open fields of war, but in the shadows of the marshes, where the young wolf would prove that betrayal could not break him. The Red Wedding had been a wound, but Robb Stark was not dead. He was alive, and he would make his enemies bleed. The marshes of the Neck stretched endlessly before Robb Stark, a labyrinth of reeds, mud, and hidden pools that shimmered under a pale winter sky. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decay, and the distant croak of frogs was the only sound save for the soft tread of his men. The Wolves of the North, as his ragtag band now called themselves, moved with the silence of specters, their faces smeared with mud to blend into the mire. Robb, cloaked in a tattered grey mantle, led the way, Grey Wind at his side, the direwolf's eyes glinting like polished amber in the gloom. Word had come 3 days prior. Ramsay Snow, the bastard of Rose Bolton, was marching south with a force of 2,000 men, intent on crushing the Stark remnants rumored to haunt the Neck. Ramsay's reputation preceded him, a sadist who flayed his enemies alive, a monster who delighted in pain. Robb's blood burned at the thought of the man who had helped orchestrate the Red Wedding, who now styled himself a lord while the North bled under Bolton rule. "They're coming for us," Cailin had said, her voice sharp as she studied a crude map sketched in the dirt of their hidden camp. "Ramsay means to draw you out, Robb. He'll burn villages, flay small folk, anything to force your hand." "Then we don't give him what he wants," Robb replied, his jaw tight. "We fight on our terms, in our territory. The Neck will be his grave." Howland Reed, the slight lord of Greywater Watch, had nodded, his green eyes gleaming with quiet cunning. "The Cranomen know these marshes better than any. We'll bleed them, your grace, one cut at a time." Now, as Robb crouched among the reeds, his men spread out in a loose semicircle, he felt the weight of their plan. The Cranningmen had prepared the ground, hidden pits lined with sharpened stakes, false paths that led to quicksand, and narrow channels where the Boltons' numbers would mean nothing. Robb's force was small, fewer than 300, but they were swift, disciplined, and fueled by a hatred that burned hotter than any hearth. Grey Wind's ears twitched, and Robb's hand tightened on his sword. A faint clatter of armor reached his ears, followed by the muffled curses of men slogging through the mire. The Boltons were close. Robb signaled to his men, a low whistle that blended with the wind, and they melted deeper into the reeds, weapons ready. The enemy appeared moments later, a column of Bolton men clad in pink and red, their banners drooping in the damp air. At their head rode Ramsay Snow, his pale eyes scanning the marshes with a predator's hunger. His armor was ostentatious, adorned with flayed man sigils, and a cruel smile played on his lips. Beside him rode a grizzled captain, barking orders to keep the men in line. Robb's heart pounded, not with fear, but with a cold, relentless fury. This was the man who had betrayed his house, who had turned Winterfell to ash, who had hunted his people like animals. But Robb held his ground, waiting for the signal. It came when the Bolton vanguard stumbled into a hidden pit, their screams echoing as stakes pierced flesh. The column faltered, and the cranmen struck. Arrows flew from the reeds, silent and deadly, felling men before they could raise their shields. Ramsay roared in fury, wheeling his horse, but the ground beneath him shifted, a false path collapsing into a bog. His horse screamed, sinking, and Ramsay leapt free, cursing as he landed in the mud. "Now, Robb shouted, and the wolves of the north surged forward. Grey wind was a blur of grey fur, tearing through the Bolton ranks, his jaws snapping shut on throats and limbs. Robb fought beside him, his sword a silver arc that carved through armor and bone. The marshes became a slaughterhouse, the Boltons' numbers useless in the tight, treacherous terrain. Ramsay, scrambling to his feet, drew his blade and bellowed for his men to rally. But the cranny men were everywhere, darting from the shadows to slit throats and vanish before retaliation could come. Greyjohn Umber, a towering figure in the chaos, smashed through the Bolton lines, his great sword cleaving men in two. Asha, with Rickon at her side, fought with a spear, her movements fluid and lethal. Robb cut his way toward Ramsay, their eyes locking across the battlefield. "Snow!" Robb roared, his voice carrying over the din. "Face me, you craven!" Ramsay's smile twisted, and he charged, his blade flashing. Their swords met with a clang that reverberated through the marshes, and the duel was on. Ramsay fought with a savage intensity, his strikes fueled by malice, but Robb was the young wolf, tempered by war and loss. He parried and countered, his movements precise, his anger a cold fire that guided his hand. "You should have died at the Twins," Ramsay spat, lunging. "The North is mine now." "The North belongs to the Starks," Robb growled, sidestepping and slashing at Ramsay's side. The blade bit deep, drawing blood, and Ramsay staggered, his smile faltering. Before Robb could press the advantage, a horn sounded, a Bolton retreat. The surviving men, battered and demoralized, fled north, leaving their dead to the marshes. Ramsay, clutching his wound, spat a curse and vanished into the reeds, his men covering his escape. Robb started after him, but Greyjohn's hand on his shoulder stopped him. "Let the bastard run," Greyjon rumbled. "He's bleeding. The marshes will finish him." Robb's chest heaved, his sword dripping red. The victory was theirs, but it was incomplete. Ramsay lived, and the Boltons still held the north. Yet the sight of his men, bloodied but triumphant, filled him with a grim resolve. They had struck a blow, and the north would hear of it. The wolves of the north returned to their hidden camp, a cluster of lean-tos deep in the neck. The mood was somber, but defiant. They had lost 20 men, a grievous toll for their small force. But the Boltons had suffered far worse, hundreds dead or wounded, their morale shattered. The Cranamen's traps had worked flawlessly, and the tale of Ramsay's defeat would spread, a spark to kindle hope among the North's scattered loyalists. Cailin tended to the wounded, her hands steady despite the exhaustion etched into her face. She had fought in the ambush, wielding a dagger with a ferocity that belied her years, and Robb felt a surge of pride for his mother. She was no warrior, but she was a Stark, and her will was iron. Rickon, sitting by the fire, sharpened a knife with Osha's guidance. The boy had killed his first man in the battle, a Bolton archer who had aimed at Robb. His face was pale, but his eyes were steady, and Robb saw in him the same stubborn strength that had carried their father through wars and betrayals. "You did well, Rickon," Robb said, kneeling beside him. "You saved lives today." Rickon nodded, his voice quiet. "I saw it in a dream. The marshes, the blood. I knew we'd win." Robb exchanged a glance with Osha, who shrugged. "The boy's got the sight, Stark. The old gods speak to him, same as they spoke to your brother Bran." The mention of Bran stabbed at Robb's heart. His younger brother, lost in the ruins of Winterfell, was a wound that never healed. But Rickon's words, eerie as they were, gave him pause. The old gods had spared him at the Twins, had guided Rickon to his side. Perhaps they were not done with House Stark. Howland Reed joined them, his expression grave. "My scouts report Ramsay's men limping back to the Dread Fort. He's wounded, but alive. Rose Bolton will tighten his grip on the north now, and the Freys will double their patrols. We've stung them, but they'll come for us harder next time." "Then we hit them again," Robb said, his voice firm. "We don't let them rest. The North needs to see we're still fighting, that the Starks endure." Catelyn's eyes met his, her voice low. Fighting isn't enough, Robb. We need allies. The Vale, the Wildlings, even the River Lords. You can't win this war alone. Robb nodded, knowing she was right. His guerrilla campaign could harass the Boltons and Freys, but to retake the north, he needed armies, resources, and a strategy to counter Tywin Lannister's machinations. The Lannisters securing King's Landing would not sit idly while the young wolf rose from the ashes. Over the next weeks, Robb's campaign intensified. The wolves of the north struck at Bolton outposts, Frey supply lines, and isolated garrisons, always vanishing before reinforcements could arrive. The Cranamen's knowledge of the terrain was their greatest weapon, allowing them to outmaneuver larger forces. Grey Wind became a legend in his own right, a ghostly predator who struck fear into the hearts of their enemies. Robb sent emissaries to potential allies. Mage Mormont, returned from Bear Island, brought 100 stout fighters and a promise of more. Jason Mallister, despite the Lannister siege at River Run, sent word that the River Lords were restless, eager to throw off Frey and Lannister yokes. Most promisingly, Howland Reed's men made contact with a wildling band south of the Wall, remnants of Mance Raider's host who had fled after Stannis Baratheon's attack. The wildlings, led by a spearwife named Ygritte, were wary but open to parley, their hatred of the Boltons outweighing their mistrust of Kneelers. The Vale, however, remained a problem. Lisa Arryn, Robb's aunt, had ignored his ravens, her isolationist policies unchanged. Cailin urged Robb to send a personal envoy, someone who could appeal to Lysa's familial ties. "Sansa is in the Vale," Cailin said, her voice trembling with hope. "If we can reach her, Lysa might listen." Robb's heart ached at the thought of Sansa, his sister, lost to the Lannisters and now trapped in Littlefinger's web. He agreed to send a small party, led by Osha and a Cranaman guide, to infiltrate the Vale and make contact. Rickon insisted on going, claiming his dreams showed him a path through the mountains. Against his better judgment, Robb relented, trusting Osha to keep his brother safe. As winter deepened, the north grew harsher. Snow fell in thick sheets and food became scarce. The wolves of the north tightened their belts, surviving on fish, roots, and the occasional deer brought down by Grey Wind. Robb's shoulder wound, though healed, ached in the cold, a constant reminder of the Red Wedding. He dreamed of Jane Westerling, her face pale and frightened, and woke with the resolve to free her from River Run's siege. A new threat emerged when word reached the camp of a Frey army massing at the Twins, led by Black Walder Frey, one of Walder's most ruthless sons. The Freys, enraged by Robb's raids, planned to sweep the neck, burning villages and slaughtering anyone suspected of aiding the Starks. Black Walder's force numbered 3,000, a hammer to crush Robb's guerrilla band. "We can't face them head-on," Howland cautioned, "but we can bleed them. The marshes favor the hunted, not the hunter." Robb devised a plan to lure the Freys into a trap. Using false trails and decoy camps, the Cranamen drew Black Walder's army deeper into the neck, where the terrain grew treacherous. Robb's men harassed the Freys with hit-and-run attacks, whittling their numbers and sowing chaos. Grey Wind led nighttime raids, his howls echoing through the marshes, driving the Freys to paranoia. The decisive blow came at a narrow causeway flanked by deep bogs. Robb's men, hidden in the reeds, waited as the Frey vanguard crossed. At Robb's signal, the Cranamen unleashed a barrage of arrows, while Grachan and his men charged from the flanks. The causeway became a killing ground, the Freys unable to maneuver in the tight space. Black Walder, caught in the melee, fought like a cornered beast, but Robb faced him, their blades clashing in a brutal duel. "You're a dead man, Stark!" Black Walder snarled, his axe swinging. "The north is ours!" Robb parried, his sword finding Black Walder's throat. "The north remembers," he said, and drove the blade home. The Frey commander fell, his blood staining the causeway red. The Frey army broke, fleeing in disarray. Robb's men pursued, cutting down stragglers, but the victory was costly. Dozens of wolves fell, and the Frey's retreat meant they would regroup, likely with Bolton reinforcements. Yet the triumph sent a ripple through the north. Black Walder's death was a blow to Frey morale, and the small folk began to whisper of the young wolf's return. In the aftermath, Robb gathered his council in the shadow of Greywater Watch. Catelyn, Howland, Grachan, and Mage Mormont sat around a fire, their faces etched with fatigue but lit with determination. Rickon and Osha had departed for the Vale, and their absence weighed on Robb, but he pushed the worry aside. The north needed him focused. "We have hurt them," Robb said, his voice steady. "But the Boltons and Freys still hold the north, and the Lannisters pull their strings. We need a bigger strike, something to rally the north and draw allies to our cause." Howland leaned forward, his voice soft but firm. Moat Cailin, the Ironborn hold it, but they're weakened, divided since Balon Greyjoy's death. If we take it, we control the North's gateway. The clans, the wildlings, even the Vale. They'll see you're not just a raider, but a king. Catelyn's eyes narrowed. It's a risk. Moat Cailin is a fortress, even in ruin, and if we fail, we lose everything. Robb met her gaze, his resolve unshaken. We have lost everything before, Mother, but we're still here. The North is still here. Moat Cailin is our chance to prove it. The council agreed, and plans were set. Robb would lead a force to Moat Cailin, using the Cranamen's stealth to approach unseen. Mage would rally the northern clans, while Jason Mallister worked to break the siege at River Run. The wildlings, if Ygritte could be persuaded, might join the fight, their numbers tipping the scales. As the meeting ended, Robb stood alone, staring into the fire. Grey wind pressed against his leg, a silent promise of loyalty. The road ahead was perilous, but Robb felt the stirrings of hope. The Red Wedding had been a betrayal, a wound that would never fully heal. But he was the king in the north, and his people needed him. The wolves would rise again, and the north would be free. The wind howled across the causeway to Moat Cailin, carrying the bitter tang of salt and the distant rumble of the sea. The ancient fortress, a crumbling relic of the first men, loomed like a skeletal giant against the gray sky, its 3 remaining towers jagged and black. Once a bastion of the north, it was now a stronghold of the Ironborn, and who clung to its ruins like barnacles to a sinking ship. Robb Stark, king in the north, crouched in the reeds a mile away, his breath misting in the chill air. Grey wind lay beside him, the direwolf's ears pricked, his golden eyes fixed on the distant walls. The wolves of the north, now numbering nearly 500 after weeks of recruiting stragglers and loyalists, were spread out in the marshes, their positions marked by subtle signals, a flash of steel, a low whistle. Howland Reed's Cranning Man had scouted the fortress for days, mapping his defenses and the Ironborn's routines. The garrison, led by a reaver named Dagmar Cleftjaw, was small, perhaps 200 men, but Moat Cailin's natural defenses made it a formidable prize. The causeway, flanked by treacherous bogs, was the only approach, and the Ironborn had fortified it with archers and crude barricades. Robb's plan was simple in concept, or brutal in execution. The Cranamenn would sow chaos under cover of night, using their knowledge of the marshes to infiltrate the fortress and sabotage its defenses. Then Robb's main force would storm the causeway, drawing the Ironborn's attention, while a smaller group, led by Grach in number, scaled the northern tower under cover of the distraction. If they could seize the gatehouse, Moat Cailin would fall, and with it, the key to the north. "This is our moment," Robb had told his men the night before, his voice carrying over the crackle of their hidden camp's fire. "Moat Cailin is the north's gateway. If we take it, we show the world the Starks are not broken. The clans, the wildlings, the river lords, they'll rally to us. The north will rise." Catelyn, her face etched with worry, had pulled him aside after. "You're gambling everything, Robb. If we fail, there's no coming back." Robb had met her gaze, his eyes hard but steady. "We've been dead before, Mother. The Red Wedding didn't end us. This won't either." Now, as dust settled over the marshes, Robb felt the weight of those words. His shoulders, scarred from the crossbow bolt at the twins, ached in the cold, and his dreams were haunted by Jane Westerling, trapped in besieged River Run. But he pushed the thoughts aside, focusing on the task ahead. The North needed a victory, and Moat Cailin was the spark to ignite it. Howland Reed, crouched nearby, signaled with a raised hand. "My men are in position. The Ironborn are lazy, half-drunk, poorly disciplined. Dagmar's no fool, but he doesn't know the marshes." Robb nodded, his hand resting on Grey Wind's neck. "Give the signal when you're ready. We move as one." The Cranningmen vanished into the reeds, silent as a shadow. Robb turned to his men, their faces grim but resolute. Grach in number, towering over the others, grinned, his great sword already drawn. Mage Mormont, her armor patched but sturdy, nodded her approval. The rest, small folk, sworn swords, and northern clansmen, stood ready, their loyalty to House Stark a fire that no betrayal could extinguish. The attack began with a whisper. Under the cover of a moonless night, the Cranamenn slipped into Moat Cailin's outer defenses, their knives glinting as they cut sentries' throats. Fires bloomed in the Ironborn's supply tents, sending plumes of smoke into the sky. Shouts of alarm echoed from the towers, and the Ironborn scrambled to respond, their archers firing blindly into the marshes. Robb seized the moment. "Now!" he roared, and the wolves of the north surged onto the causeway, shields raised against the hail of arrows. Grey Wind led the charge, a grey blur that leaped over barricades and tore through the Ironborn like a storm. Robb fought beside him, his sword a silver arc, cutting down reavers who stood in his path. The causeway was narrow, forcing the Ironborn to fight in tight ranks, but the Cranamen's sabotage had weakened their defenses. Barricades collapsed under the wolves' assault, and archers fell to unseen arrows from the reeds. Dagmar Cleftjaw, his face scarred and his axe gleaming, rallied his men at the gatehouse. "Hold the line, you dogs!" he bellowed, his voice carrying over the chaos. "The drowned god watches!" Robb locked eyes with the Ironborn captain, his blood singing with the thrill of battle. "For the north!" he shouted, and charged, his men roaring behind him. The clash was brutal, steel meeting steel, blood soaking the ancient stones. Robb parried Dagmar's axe, their weapons sparking, and drove his sword into the reaver's shoulder. Dagmar staggered but fought on, his axe swinging wildly. Meanwhile, Greatjohn's team scaled the northern tower using ropes and grappling hooks provided by the Cranmen. The Ironborn, distracted by the causeway assault, failed to notice until it was too late. Greatjohn's men stormed the tower, overwhelming the defenders and seizing the gatehouse. With a groan, the ancient gates creaked open, and Robb's forces poured into the courtyard. The battle was over in less than an hour. Dagmar, wounded and cornered, threw down his axe and surrendered, his men following suit. The surviving Ironborn, fewer than 50, were bound and disarmed. Moat Cailin was theirs. Robb stood in the courtyard, his chest heaving, his sword dripping red. Grey Wind padded to his side, unharmed but bloodied, and Robb knelt to stroke the direwolf's fur. "We did it," he whispered, more to himself than the beast. The wolves of the north cheered, their voices echoing off the ancient walls, but Robb's triumph was tempered by the cost. Dozens of his men lay dead, their bodies strewn across the causeway and courtyard. Catelyn approached, her face pale but proud. "You have done what no one thought possible, Robb. The north will hear of this. The Starks live." Robb nodded, but his eyes were distant. "This is just the beginning. The Boltons and Freys will come for us, and the Lannisters won't sit idle. We need to hold this place and build our strength." Howland Reed, emerging from the shadows, agreed. "My men will fortify the towers. The causeway is our strength. Let the Boltons try to cross it. They'll drown in their own blood." The days that followed were a flurry of activity. The wolves of the north repaired Moat Cailin's defenses, using scavenged timber and stone to shore up the walls. The Crannogmen set traps along the causeway and in the surrounding marshes, ensuring any attacker would pay a heavy price. Dagmar and his surviving Ironborn were kept under guard, their fate undecided. Robb considered executing them, but spared them for now, hoping to use them as leverage in negotiations with the Iron Islands. Word of Moat Cailin's fall spread like wildfire. Ravens carried the news to the northern clans, the river lords, and even the wildlings. The small folk whispered of the young wolf's return, and songs began to circulate, ballads of the king who defied death, who rose from the Red Wedding to reclaim his birthright. Robb's legend grew, a beacon for the North's downtrodden, but he knew legends alone wouldn't win a war. Mage Mormont returned from the northern hills, bringing 300 clansmen, hardy warriors from houses Flint, Wool, and Nori. Their chieftains knelt before Robb, pledging their axes to his cause. "The North remembers your grace," said Hugo Wool, his beard flecked with snow. "We'll fight till the last man to see a Stark in Winterfell." Robb clasped their hands, his heart swelling. "Winterfell will rise again," he promised. "But first we hold the North." More good news came from the wildlings. Ygritte, the spearwife leading a band of 500 free folk, sent a messenger agreeing to parley. The wildlings, scattered after Mance Rayder's defeat, were desperate for a cause, and their hatred of the Boltons made them potential allies. Robb arranged a meeting at the edge of the marshes, under a flag of truce, and prepared to face the fiery spearwife whose name was whispered with both fear and admiration. The Riverlords, however, remained a problem. Jason Mallister's ravens reported that Riverrun's siege tightened, with Frey and Lannister forces closing in. Jane Westerling, Robb's wife, was still inside, her safety uncertain. Robb's heart ached for her, but Moat Cailin was too vital to abandon. He sent a coded message to Edmure Tully, urging him to hold fast and promising relief as soon as possible. The Vale was another frustration. Osha and Rickon had not yet returned, and Lysa Arryn's silence was deafening. Cailin, ever hopeful, believed Sansa's presence might sway her sister, but Robb was less certain. Littlefinger's influence over the Vale was a shadow he couldn't ignore. The meeting with Ygritte took place on a windswept hill overlooking the marshes, the air thick with the promise of snow. Robb, accompanied by Howland, Grayson, and a small guard, rode under a white banner, Grey Wind at his side. Ygritte awaited them, her red hair ablaze against the grey landscape, her bow slung across her back. Her wildlings, a motley crew of spearwives, archers, and grizzled warriors, eyed the Starks warily. "You're the young wolf, then," Ygritte said, her voice sharp but curious. "Heard you died at a wedding. Yet here you are, taking castles." Robb met her gaze unflinching. "The North doesn't die so easily. I'm here to take back what's mine, and I need fighters. The Boltons and Freys are your enemies as much as mine." Ygritte snorted, but her eyes softened. "You kneelers in your wars. But I, the Boltons are filth. Flayed my kin, they did. What's your offer?" "Join us," Robb said. "Fight with us to retake the North. In return, I'll give you land south of the Wall, a place to call your own, free from Bolton or Lannister chains." The wildlings murmured, some scoffing, others intrigued. Ygritte studied him, her expression unreadable. "You're not like most kneelers, Stark. Got a fire in you, but my people don't bend the knee." "I'm not asking you to," Robb said. "I'm asking you to fight, side by side as equals." Ygritte grinned, a flash of teeth. "I like you, Wolf. We'll talk more, but don't think you've won me yet." The parley ended without a firm alliance, but Ygritte agreed to send warriors to scout with the Acranamen, a tentative step toward cooperation. Robb rode back to Moat Cailin, his mind racing. The wildlings were a gamble, but their numbers could tip the scales, especially if the Boltons struck soon. The expected attack came sooner than Robb anticipated. A week after the wildling parley, Crannyman scouts reported a Bolton army marching south, led by Roose Bolton himself. The force numbered 4,000, bolstered by Frey cavalry and sellswords from the south. Roose, ever cautious, had learned from Ramsay's defeat and moved methodically, burning villages to deny Robb supplies, and sending outriders to probe the marshes. "They're coming to retake Moat Cailin," Howland said, his voice grim. "Roose won't make the same mistakes as his bastard. He'll try to starve us out or force us onto the causeway." Robb studied the map, his fingers tracing the causeway's narrow path. "Then we don't let him. We use the marshes, the traps, the wildlings. We bleed him before he reaches the walls." Catelyn's eyes were fierce. "You can't afford a siege, Robb. If River Run falls, the River Lords will break. If the Vale stays neutral, we're alone. You need a decisive victory now." Robb nodded, his mind made up. "We'll give Roose a battle he won't forget, but not on his terms." The plan was bold, bordering on reckless. Robb would lure the Boltons onto the causeway, where their numbers would be constrained. The Cranningmen and wildling scouts would harass their flanks, sowing chaos, while Grayson and Mage led a reserve force to strike from the marshes when the Boltons were committed. Moat Cailin's walls, though crumbling, would hold against a frontal assault, giving Robb time to spring the trap. The battle began at dawn, the Bolton army advancing under a pale sun. Roose, mounted on a black destrier, directed his forces with cold precision, his pink cloak a stark contrast to the grey landscape. The causeway was a choke point, and the Boltons moved cautiously, their archers covering the vanguard. Robb watched from Moat Cailin's gatehouse, Grey Wind growling at his side. The Crannymen struck first, their arrows and javelins thinning the Bolton ranks. The wildlings, true to Ygritte's word, joined the fray, their hit-and-run tactics infuriating the disciplined Bolton infantry. Roose countered with cavalry, sending Frey riders into the marshes, but the bogs swallowed them, horses and men alike. Robb led the defense on the causeway, his men holding the barricades against wave after wave of Bolton attackers. Grey Wind was a terror, leaping from the walls to tear through the enemy, his howls rallying the wolves. The battle raged for hours, the causeway slick with blood, but the Boltons' numbers began to tell. Roose's reserves pushed forward, threatening to overwhelm the defenders. "Now!" Robb signaled, and Grayson's reserve force emerged from the marshes, their war cries echoing. Mage Mormont's clansmen followed, their axes gleaming. The Bolton rear faltered, caught between the causeway and the marsh ambush. Ygritte's wildlings pressed the attack, their arrows finding gaps in Bolton armor. Roose, seeing the tide turn, signaled a retreat, but the marshes offered no mercy. The Cranamen's traps, pitfalls, quicksand, and hidden stakes claimed hundreds as the Boltons fled. Robb pursued, his sword flashing until the enemy was a broken remnant scattering north. The victory was decisive but costly. Nearly half of Robb's men lay dead or wounded, and Moat Cailin's walls were battered. Roose had escaped, his army diminished but intact, and Robb knew the Boltons would regroup. Yet the North had seen the young wolf triumph, and the news would spread to the clans, the river lords, and perhaps even the Vale. That night, as the wolves tended their wounds, a rider arrived from the south. It was Osha, her face gaunt but fierce, with Rickon at her side. The boy ran to Robb, his eyes wide with urgency. "Sansa's alive," he said, his voice trembling. "She's in the Vale with Littlefinger. But Lysa won't help us. She's mad, Robb." Osha nodded, her spear planted in the ground. "The boy's right. The Vale's a snake pit, but Sansa's strong. She sent a message. Says she's working to sway the lords. We need to get her out." Robb's heart soared at the news of Sansa's survival, but the Vale's refusal was a blow. He looked to Cailin, whose face was a mask of hope and fear. "We'll find a way," he said. "Sansa's a Stark. She'll endure." As the fire burned low, Robb stood atop Moat Cailin's highest tower, grey wind at his side. The north stretched before him, vast and unforgiving, its heart beating with the will to fight. The Boltons were weakened, the Freys reeling, but the Lannisters loomed in the south, and winter was coming. Robb's war was far from over, but he was the king in the north, and he would not yield. The snow fell in heavy curtains over Moat Cailin, blanketing the ancient fortress in a silence broken only by the crackle of fires and the low murmurs of the wolves of the north. Robb Stark stood on the battlements of the Drunkard's Tower, his cloak dusted with frost, his breath clouding in the frigid air. Grey Wind sat beside him, the dire wolf's eyes gleaming like lanterns in the dusk, ever watchful. Below, the causeway stretched into the marshes, a scarred ribbon of stone and blood, testament to the battles fought and won. Moat Cailin was theirs, a defiant stake in the heart of the north, but Robb knew the war was far from over. The victory over Roose Bolton's army had been a turning point, a clarion call to the north that the Starks endured. The northern clans had swelled Robb's ranks, their chieftains swearing fealty with axes raised. Ygritte's wildlings, though still wary, had committed 1,000 spears to his cause, their hatred of the Boltons binding them to the young wolf. Ravens from Jason Mallister brought word of unrest among the river lords, with whispers of rebellion against the Frey and Lannister Seegers at River Run. Yet the Vale remained silent, Lysa Arryn's refusal a bitter pill, tempered only by the news of Sansa's survival. Robb's sister, trapped in Littlefinger's web, was a spark of hope in a darkening world. Winter had tightened its grip, and with it came hunger. The North's fields lay fallow, its granaries plundered by Boltons and Freys. Robb's men tightened their belts, surviving on fish, game, and the dwindling stores seized from Ironborn and Bolton supplies. The small folk, too, suffered, their villages burned by Rose's retreating forces. Robb sent what aid he could, food, blankets, and promises of justice, but he knew promises alone wouldn't fill bellies or warm hearths. Catelyn, ever the pragmatist, pressed him daily. Moat Cailin is a symbol, Robb, but it's not enough. The North needs Winterfell, and the Riverlands need River Run. You must strike now before the Lannisters send reinforcements. Robb nodded, his jaw tight. "I know, Mother, but we're stretched thin. Roose is licking his wounds at the Dreadfort, but Ramsay's still out there, and the Freys hold the twins. If we march on Winterfell, we risk losing Moat Cailin. If we march on River Run, we abandon the North." Howland Reed, his voice soft as the marsh wind, offered counsel. "The Crannog men can hold Moat Cailin. The marshes are our strength. Let the Boltons and Freys come. They'll drown before they breach the walls. Your fight is elsewhere, your grace. Winterfell is the North's heart. Take it, and the people will follow." Robb's gaze drifted to the horizon where the ruins of his childhood home lay, a wound that never healed. Winterfell, burned by Theon Greyjoy's treachery, was now a Bolton stronghold, its halls defiled by Ramsay's cruelty. To retake it would be to reclaim the Stark legacy, to prove the North unbroken. But the path was fraught, and Robb's forces, though bolstered, numbered fewer than 3,000 against the Boltons' thousands and the Freys' reinforcements. Rickon, returned from the Vale with Osha, sat by the fire that night, his young face hardened by war. "I dreamed of Winterfell," he said, his voice low. "The weirwood was weeping, but it spoke your name, Robb. It's time to go home." Osha, sharpening her spear, nodded. "The boy's right. The old gods want you there. The North wants you there." Robb felt the weight of their words, the pull of destiny. He looked to Grey Wind, whose steady gaze anchored him. "Then we march," he said, his voice firm, "for Winterfell, for the north." The march to Winterfell was a grueling trek through snow-choked forests and frozen rivers. Robb's army moved in small, swift groups to avoid detection, guided by Crannyman scouts and wildling outriders. Ygritte's spear wives proved invaluable, their knowledge of winter survival keeping the men fed and warm. Great Umber and Mage Mormont led the vanguard, their clansmen chanting war songs that echo through the trees. Cailin, against Robb's wishes, insisted on joining the march, her presence a reminder of the family they fought for. Howland Reed remained at Moat Cailin with a small garrison, tasked with holding the fortress and harassing Bolton supply lines. Jason Mallister sent word that he would lead a Riverlord uprising to relieve Riverrun, drawing Frey attention south and easing the pressure on Robb's campaign. The plan was a gamble, splitting their forces, but Robb trusted his allies. The North's survival depended on boldness. Scouts reported that Winterfell was lightly garrisoned, Ramsay Snow commanding a force of fewer than 1,000, bolstered by sellswords and Bolton loyalists. Rose, wary after his defeat at Moat Cailin, had retreated to the Dreadfort, leaving his bastard to hold the Stark ancestral seat. Ramsay's cruelty had alienated many, and whispers reached Robb of discontent among the castle's servants and smallfolk. It was a crack in the Bolton armor, one Robb intended to exploit. The wolves of the north reached the Wolfswood, a day's march from Winterfell, and made camp in a sheltered glen. Robb gathered his council, Ygritte, Gretchen, Mage, Cailin, and a handful of clan chieftains, to finalize their strategy. The plan was twofold: a diversionary assault on Winterfell's gates to draw Ramsay's forces, while a smaller group, led by Robb and Osha, infiltrated the castle through a forgotten tunnel known to Rickon from his childhood explorations. Once inside, they would open the gates, allowing the main force to storm the castle. "It's risky," Cailin warned, her eyes searching Robb's. "If the tunnels collapsed or guarded, you will be trapped." Robb's hand rested on Grey Wind's neck. "Risk is all we have, Mother. Winterfell's our home. We take it, or we die trying." Ygritte, her bow slung across her back, grinned. "I like your fire, Wolf. My spears will keep Ramsay's eyes on the gates. You just get that door open." Rickon, though forbidden from joining the assault, insisted on guiding Robb to the tunnel's entrance. "I know the way," he said, his voice fierce. "I won't let you down." Robb clasped his brother's shoulder, pride and fear warring in his chest. "You've done enough, Rickon. Stay safe. The North needs you." The attack began at midnight, under a sky heavy with clouds. Ygritte's wildlings and Graydon's clansmen assaulted Winterfell's gates, their war cries and flaming arrows lighting the night. Ramsay's forces, caught off guard, manned the walls, their archers returning fire. The diversion worked. Winterfell's defenses focused outward, leaving the castle's interior vulnerable. Robb, Osha, and a dozen hand-picked men slipped through the Wolfswood, guided by Rick's directions. Grey Wind led the way, his nose low, sniffing for danger. The tunnel entrance, hidden beneath a gnarled weirwood, was overgrown but intact. Robb's heart thudded as he crawled through the damp, narrow passage, the scent of earth and roots thick in his nostrils. Memories of his childhood, playing with Jon, Arya, and Bran in these very woods, flooded him, stealing his resolve. The tunnel emerged in Winterfell's crypts, the air cold and heavy with the presence of the Stark ancestors. Robb lit a torch, its light casting shadows on the stone kings, their direwolf statues glaring down. "We're home," he whispered, and Grey Wind's low growl echoed his sentiment. Osha's spear was ready as they ascended to the castle's lower levels. The corridors were quiet, and the servants cowering or fled, but a patrol of Bolton men-at-arms rounded a corner. Grey Wind struck first. A silent predator, and Robb's sword followed, dispatching the guards before they could raise the alarm. The group moved swiftly, reaching the gatehouse as the battle outside raged. Robb and his men overwhelmed the gatehouse guards, their blades flashing in the torchlight. With a heave, they raised the portcullis, and the wolves of the north poured in, their war cries shaking the walls. Greatjon's clansmen and Ygritte's wildlings fought with savage intensity, cutting through Ramsay's defenders. The courtyard became a maelstrom of steel and blood, the snow stained red. Robb sought Ramsay, his eyes scanning the chaos. He found the bastard atop the keep's steps, his pale eyes gleaming with madness, a flaying knife in one hand, a sword in the other. "Stark!" Ramsay spat, his voice a snarl. "You should have stayed dead!" Robb charged, Grey Wind at his side. Their duel was brutal, Ramsay's ferocity matched by Robb's precision. The bastard fought like a cornered beast, his blade seeking Robb's heart, but Robb was the young wolf, forged in betrayal and war. He parried a wild swing and drove his sword through Ramsay's chest, the blade piercing armor and bone. Ramsay gasped, his eyes wide, and collapsed, his blood pooling on the steps. The Bolton forces, seeing their leader fall, broke. Some surrendered, others fled, but the wolves showed little mercy. Winterfell was retaken, its halls echoing with the triumph of the Starks. Dawn broke over Winterfell, the snow falling gently on the battered castle. Robb stood in the godswood before the heart tree, its red leaves stark against the white. Grey Wind lay at his feet unharmed, his presence a comfort. The battle had cost them dearly, hundreds dead, including many clansmen and wildlings, but Winterfell was theirs, a beacon of hope for the north. Cailin joined him, her face weary but radiant. "You've done it, Robb. Winterfell is ours again." Robb nodded, his eyes on the weirwood's carved face. "But the war isn't over. Roose still holds the Dreadfort, and the Freys the twins. The Lannisters will come for us, and Jaine's still at Riverrun." Ygritte, bloodied but unbowed, approached, her grin fierce. "You kneelers are mad, fighting for stone and snow. But you've got my respect, Wolf. My spears are yours, long as you keep fighting." Greatjon Umber, his arm in a sling, roared his approval. "The north is yours, your grace. Let's march on the Dreadfort and flay the Boltons to the last." Robb raised a hand, his voice steady. "We will, Greatjon. But first, we rebuild. Winterfell will be a stronghold again, a place for our people to rally. We send word to the Riverlords, the Vale, the clans. The north rises, and we'll face our enemies together." A raven arrived that morning, bearing news from Riverrun. Jason Mallister's uprising had broken the siege, and Jaine Westerling was safe, though Edmure Tully was wounded. Robb's heart soared at the thought of his wife, and he vowed to bring her to Winterfell soon. Another message came from the Vale, carried by a Cranna man who had slipped past Littlefinger's spies. Sansa had rallied a faction of Vale lords, sowing seeds of rebellion against Lysa's neutrality. "Hold fast," her letter read. "The Vale will come." Robb folded the parchment, hope kindling in his chest. Sansa, Rickon, and he, the Starks, were scattered but alive, their bonds unbroken. Arya and Bran were still lost, but Robb refused to believe them dead. The old gods had spared him for a reason, and he would fight until his family was whole. As the day wore on, Robb walked Winterfell's halls, his footsteps echoing in the scarred stone. The great hall, once filled with his father's laughter, was silent, but he could feel the North's pulse, strong and unyielding. He knelt in the crypts before Ned Stark's statue and swore an oath. "I'll make you proud, father. The North will be free." That night the wolves of the North feasted in the great hall, their voices raised in song. Ygritte taught them a wildling ballad, and Graydon's laughter shook the rafters. Cailin watched with a mother's pride, and Rickon, clutching a wooden sword, vowed to fight beside his brother one day. Robb stood at the high table, raising a horn of ale. "To the north!" he called, and the hall roared in answer. Grey Wind howled, a sound that carried beyond the walls, a challenge to their enemies. The Red Wedding had been a betrayal, a wound that would never fully heal. But Robb Stark had survived, and with him, the North's hope. Winterfell stood, a defiant heart in a land of ice and fire. The Boltons, Freys, and Lannisters would come, but Robb was ready. He was the king in the North, and his war was just beginning.